the way she said his name in the hallway. Quietly, like it was something she was testing the weight of, was the thing he would remember long after he had forgotten the sequence of everything else. He had been standing near the water fountain outside the third-floor conference room, reading a structural report on the Kellerman Bridge overhaul, not thinking about her, not thinking about much of anything, when she came around the corner and saw him there and said, "You must be Decker." Not a question, something else, like she had already formed an opinion and was simply confirming the name that went with it. His full name was Thomas Decker. He was 41 years old and had been working at Bridgemont Industrial Services for 11 years, most of them without complaint, all of them without recognition. He was the kind of man who fixed things before anyone else noticed they were broken. The kind of man whose name appeared on completion reports, but not on commendations. He wore the same 3 flannel shirts on rotation, kept a photograph of his daughter in his breast pocket rather than on his phone, and drove a truck that was 12 years old and, as he had told his daughter more than once, still had a lot of good miles left in it. Her name was Nadia Whitmore. She was 34, the new infrastructure liaison assigned by Aldrin Capital, the firm that had recently acquired a controlling stake in Bridgemont. She had a manner that was precise without being cold, the kind of person who remembered everything you said and filed it somewhere useful. The first time she shook his hand, she did not look down at his calluses the way most people from the financial side did. She looked directly at him. He noticed that. He did not think about it beyond that. He had stopped letting himself think much about women who looked directly at him. It had been 4 years since Mara died, 4 years of mornings where he made breakfast for a 9-year-old girl named Willa, and tried not to let the quiet become too loud. He had gotten reasonably good at that. Not perfect, but reasonably good. The Kellerman project was the largest Bridgemont had taken on in 6 years. A full structural rehabilitation of a 3-span truss bridge on the county's main freight corridor, with a completion deadline tied to federal reimbursement schedules. The margin for error was small. The margin for shortcuts was, as far as Thomas was concerned, non-existent. He had been saying that to his project supervisor, a man named Frank Gould, since the materials specifications were first submitted in February. The load-bearing splice plates being sourced from their preferred vendor were not the grade specified in the original engineering drawings. They were cheaper, they would pass a surface inspection. They would not, in Thomas's assessment, hold up to the stress cycles the bridge would experience over the next 20 years. He had written this in a report. He had said it in 2 meetings. Frank Gould had thanked him for his diligence and explained that the procurement decisions were above the project level and that Thomas's job was to execute, not to evaluate. He had gone home that night and sat at the kitchen table while Willa did her homework across from him, and he had looked at his daughter's bent head. The particular way she pushed her hair behind her ear when she was concentrating. And he had thought, with a clarity that felt almost physical, that he was not going to sign off on something that could fail, that he did not care about his career enough to do that some things were not negotiable. He sent the report up the chain the following morning. Nadia had been at Bridgemont for 3 weeks when she requested access to the project documentation for Kellerman. Frank Gould had told her, with the polished confidence of someone who had navigated many oversight visits, that everything was in order and that she was welcome to review whatever she needed. He had said this in the tone of a man who believed she would look at spreadsheets and move on. She did not move on. She found Thomas's report on the 4th day of her review. She read it twice. She then went looking for Thomas Decker. He was in the maintenance bay, rerouting a hydraulic line on a piece of inspection equipment when she appeared in the doorway. She was in a blazer and her good shoes, and he was covered in grease up to his elbows, and they looked at each other for a moment before she said, "I read your materials assessment on Kellerman, the one from February." He straightened up. "Okay, You wrote that the splice plates didn't meet the load-bearing specifications on the engineering drawings. I did. Were you overruled? He looked at her for a moment. He had learned to be careful with questions like that. I was told the procurement decisions were made above the project level. She was quiet for a moment. Who told you that? Frank Gould. She nodded, but not in the way of someone who was satisfied. It was more the nod of someone checking something off a mental list and moving immediately to the next item. She looked around the bay, at the equipment and the organized racks of tools, the handwritten labels on the parts bins. This yours? She asked. Most of it, he said. She looked back at him. I'm going to need to talk to you again, she said. Not here. Somewhere quieter. He said that would be fine. They met twice in the following week, in a small conference room on the second floor that was usually empty after 4 o'clock. She asked him careful questions and wrote nothing down, which he understood to mean she was not ready to create a record yet. He answered her carefully and did not speculate beyond what he knew. In between, they talked about other things, not much, and not for long, but enough. She asked how long he had been in industrial maintenance. He told her 11 years at Bridgemont, 4 before that at a fabrication shop in Dayton. She asked if he liked it. He said he liked the logic of it, that mechanical systems told you the truth if you knew how to ask. She had smiled at that, a small contained smile, and looked down at the table. He had noticed, in the way he had trained himself not to, that she had a habit of turning her coffee cup in her hands when she was thinking. He noticed. He did not let himself do anything with that. The Wednesday of the second week, he was at his daughter's school for a parent-teacher meeting at 3 in the afternoon. Willa was doing well in reading and struggling with long division, and had recently organized a one-person campaign to get the school library to stock more books about bridges, which had made her teacher laugh and made Thomas feel something he did not have a good word for. Pride was part of it. The rest was harder to name. He was on his way back to his truck when his phone rang. It was a number he did not recognize. Mr. Decker, said the voice on the other end. It was Aldrin Capital's Human Resources Director. He had never spoken to her before. I'm calling to inform you that your position at Bridgemont Industrial Services has been eliminated, effective end of business today. He stood in the parking lot of his daughter's school with his phone against his ear and the late afternoon light going long across the asphalt, and thought, with a strange, flat clarity, that he had not brought a jacket and he was cold. I need to understand what you're saying, he said. She told him again. Position eliminated. End of business today. He would receive information by mail regarding final pay. Benefits would continue through the end of the month. He did not say anything for a moment. Then he asked whether this had anything to do with his February materials assessment on the Kellerman project. The HR director said she was not able to speak to specific operational decisions. He thanked her. He was not sure why he did that. He hung up. He sat in his truck for 11 minutes. Then he picked up Willa from after school and drove home and made dinner and helped her with long division, and did not say anything about it because she was 9 and there was nothing she could do, and he would figure something out. He had always figured something out. He did not call anyone that night. He did not know who he would have called. His brother was in Phoenix. His closest friend from work had left Bridgemont 2 years ago for a job in Tennessee. His mother-in-law, Carol, the person who had helped him most in the 2 years after Mara died, was 67, and he was not going to put this on her at 11 o'clock at night. He sat at the kitchen table after Willa was in bed and did the math. Savings, enough for 4 months if he was careful. Willa's health insurance would lapse at the end of the month. He had a dentist appointment for her scheduled for the 17th. He wrote that down on a notepad so he would not forget. He made a list of things to do in the morning. He went to bed. He did not sleep well, but he went to bed. He learned, from a former colleague 3 weeks later, that the Kellerman project had continued without him, that the splice plates he had flagged were being installed, that Frank Gould had signed off on the materials substitution, and that the project was on schedule. He thought about that for a long time. He had been doing contract work by then. Smaller jobs, commercial maintenance gigs, the kind of work he could get quickly and without needing a reference from Bridgemont. It was not enough, but it was something. Willa had started noticing that he was home more, and she had decided this was good, and her uncomplicated happiness about it was, some days, the only thing that made him feel steady. One evening she climbed into the chair next to him while he was reviewing a commercial HVAC schematic at the kitchen table, and she looked at the drawing for a moment with the serious, focused expression she had inherited entirely from her mother. And then she said, "Dad, does it bother you when something's built wrong and you can't fix it?" He looked at her. "Yeah," he said. "It does." She nodded as if that confirmed something. "Me too," she said. "Like when somebody puts a book back in the wrong place in the library and I can see it from across the room and it just sits there wrong." He laughed. It surprised him, the laugh. It came up from somewhere he hadn't accessed in a while. "Yeah," he said. "Exactly like that." She leaned against his arm and went back to her book. He went back to the schematic. Outside the kitchen window, the street was quiet, and the neighbor's porch light was on, and the night was the kind of ordinary, unremarkable thing that is invisible when you have enough of it and unbearable to think about losing. Nadia called him on a Tuesday morning in late October. He almost didn't answer. He didn't recognize the number, and he had been getting calls from creditors about a medical bill from Willa's dentist appointment that insurance hadn't fully covered, and he was not in the mood for that conversation. But something made him pick up. "It's Nadia Whitmore," she said. "I'm sorry to call without warning. I got your number from the Bridgemont project directory before I returned my access credentials." He was standing at the counter in his kitchen, drinking coffee that had gone cold. "Okay," he said. "I want to tell you something," she said. "I'm not sure if it will help, but I think you should know it." She told him that she had escalated his materials report internally after his termination, that she had flagged the Kellerman splice plate issue to Aldrin Capital's own structural consultant, who had reviewed the specifications and agreed with Thomas's assessment, that the project had been paused for re-evaluation, that the substitute plates were being removed, and the original specifications reinstated. He sat down. He hadn't realized he was standing until he sat down. "The people who made the procurement decision," he said, "what happened to them?" She was quiet for a moment. "That's still being worked through," she said. "I'm not able to speak to specifics. But the plates are coming out." "Yes," she said, "the plates are coming out." He looked at his coffee cup. He turned it once in his hands. He thought distantly that she had a habit of doing the same thing with hers. "Why are you telling me this?" he said. Not unkindly, he just wanted to understand. She was quiet again for longer this time. "Because you were right," she said. "And you lost your job for it. And I thought you deserved to know that what you said mattered, even if the people who fired you are never going to say that to you." He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "Thank you." They stayed on the line a few seconds longer than the conversation required. He noticed that. He had stopped pretending not to. She called again 3 weeks later. He was not surprised, though he would not have admitted that to anyone. She asked if he might want to get coffee sometime. She said she was asking because she had found herself thinking about what he'd said, about mechanical systems telling you the truth if you knew how to ask. And she had thought about other things he had said as well, and she had decided she was not interested in pretending otherwise. He had held the phone and looked at the photograph of Willa that was pinned to the corkboard above his desk, the one from 2 summers ago at the lake, where Willa was squinting into the sun and laughing at something he'd said, and he had thought about Mara, the way he always did, not with grief, but with the particular quality of acknowledgement that grief eventually becomes if you let it. He had thought about how Mara had been gone 4 years, and he had done the thing that needed to be done and loved their daughter, and kept the house and not fallen apart, and he had thought, with a careful kind of hope, that maybe that was enough. that maybe the not falling apart was its own kind of foundation. I would like that, he told Nadia. They had coffee twice before she told him her father owned Aldrin Capital. She told him at the end of the second coffee, at a small place on Elm near the river. When they had been there long enough that the afternoon light had shifted, and the cups had been refilled twice, and the conversation had moved through project management, and then through childhoods, and then settled somewhere quieter and more honest. She said it plainly, the way she said most things. She said, "There's something I think I should tell you, and I don't want to tell you, but I think I owe it to you." His name was Stuart Whitmore. 71 years old. Built Aldrin Capital over 40 years from a regional private equity firm into something with a national portfolio. He had signed off on the Bridgemont acquisition personally. He was the reason, at several removes, but directly nonetheless, that the cost-cutting pressure on the Kellerman project had existed. He was the reason, at those same removes, that Thomas Decker had been standing in a school parking lot in October with nothing in his hands. Thomas was quiet for a long time after she finished. The coffee shop had light jazz playing from somewhere he couldn't see. A couple near the window was arguing quietly about something. The barista was restocking cups behind the counter. All of it felt very far away. "Did you know?" he said. "Before." "No," she said. "I didn't go through your file until after I called you in October. I knew the acquisition had involved personnel changes. I didn't know your name was one of them until I looked." He believed her. He examined the belief carefully, the way he would examine a weld, looking for the place where it might fail. He could not find it. He believed her. "And now?" he said. She looked at him steadily. "I think you were treated unjustly," she said. "I think my father runs a company that made a decision that cost you your livelihood and put corners on a public safety structure. I am not able to undo that. I would like to, and I can't." She paused. "I also think the last 2 months have been the most honest conversations I have had with anyone in a long time, and I didn't want to keep having them without you knowing who my father is. That felt like a kind of dishonesty I wasn't willing to do." He looked down at the table. He thought about Willa. He thought about the 4 months of savings that had become 7 weeks of savings by the time the contract work picked up. He thought about the dentist bill. He thought about standing in that parking lot in the cold. He thought about Mara, who had told him once, in the particular direct way she had of saying true things, that holding on to a wrong didn't make you righteous, that it just made you heavy. "I need some time," he said. "I know," Nadia said. "Take it." He took 3 weeks. He did not call her during that time. He thought about it often, and then he thought about the Kellerman Bridge, which was being repaired correctly now, which was going to carry freight trucks and school buses and county maintenance vehicles for the next 30 years because somebody had said the thing that needed to be said and someone else had heard it. He thought about that for a long time. He also thought about Willa, who had met Nadia once, briefly and by accident, when Nadia had stopped by the job site where Thomas was doing a boiler inspection and Willa had been with him because it was a teacher workday and he had no other option. Willa had looked at Nadia with the evaluating, unsentimental gaze of a 9-year-old and said, "Are you an engineer?" Nadia had said, "Not quite." Willa had considered this and said, "My dad is. He's very good at it." And then she had gone back to her book, the matter resolved to her apparent satisfaction. He had watched Nadia's face when that happened. She had looked at Willa with something careful and sincere, and then she had looked at him with it too. He had stored that away. He brought it out now and looked at it again. He called her on a Sunday evening, after Willa was in bed. "I've been thinking about something you said," he told her. "When you called in October. You said what I said mattered, even if the people who fired me were never going to say so. And I've been thinking that I spent 11 years at Bridgemont waiting for someone to say so. And I don't think that was ever going to happen there, independent of what occurred. I think I already knew that." She was quiet, listening. "I also think you did the thing you were supposed to do," he said. "When you found my report, you didn't file it away. You didn't let it get managed, you pushed on it. He paused. A lot of people in your position wouldn't have done that. Your father's company, your access, your career path. A lot of people would have made different choices. I didn't do it for you, she said. I didn't know you then. I know, he said. That's the part I keep coming back to. You did it because it was right. That's not nothing. Another pause. The line between them was quiet in the way that meant they were both paying attention. I'd like to get dinner sometime, he said. If the offer is still open. It's still open, she said. He met Stuart Whitmore 8 months later, in the spring, at a dinner that Nadia had arranged with more care than she let show. She had told her father ahead of time what Thomas knew and what she felt about him and what she expected from that evening. Thomas had learned this afterward. At the time, he had walked into the restaurant in his good jacket and shaken the hand of a 71-year-old man who had built something enormous and run it with a ruthlessness that had, at one significant remove, changed the entire shape of Thomas's life. Stuart Whitmore was shorter than Thomas had imagined. He had the eyes of someone who had spent decades reading people across negotiating tables. He looked at Thomas the way Thomas looked at load-bearing structures, systematically finding the stress points. Dinner was not easy. It was not supposed to be. They talked around the real subject for most of the meal, the way careful people do when the real subject is something that can't be undone. Thomas did not pretend it hadn't happened. Stuart Whitmore did not pretend he wasn't responsible. At one point toward the end, Stuart said, I understand you flagged the materials issue formally before the termination. 3 times, Thomas said. Stuart was quiet for a moment. It should have been heard, he said. It was not an apology. Thomas had not expected one and had told himself he did not need one, and sitting there, he found that was mostly true. After, in the parking lot, Nadia stood next to him and did not say anything for a while. Then she said, I know that wasn't comfortable. No, he agreed. Was it okay? He thought about it. He thought about the bridge. He thought about Willa, asleep at her grandmother's house, who had read 2 chapters of her library book before bed, and who would want to tell him about it in the morning. He thought about Nadia standing next to him in the parking lot, her shoulder almost touching his, the spring air carrying the smell of rain from somewhere west of the city. Yeah, he said. It was okay. She didn't say anything. She turned her cup. She was holding takeout coffee from the restaurant, which was the kind of detail that was very like her, once in both hands. He noticed. He had gotten to the point where he noticed all of it, the small habits and the considered silences, and the way she looked at Willa like she understood what she was looking at. He had gotten to the point where he did not try to stop himself from noticing. They walked to his truck, and he drove her to her car, and the city moved past them in the evening light, the buildings and the overpasses, and, somewhere on the western edge of the county, a 3-span truss bridge on the main freight corridor, carrying weight the way it was built to carry it, the way it was supposed to, the way it would for years. He did not drive past it, but he knew it was there.